Well, good evening. You are tuned into the open classroom at Northeastern University. My name is Ted Landsmark. I'm director of the Kitty and Michael Dukakis Center for Urban and Regional Policy. And this semester, we're taking a really interesting and in-depth look at the impact of design on transforming communities. And we at Northeastern have been delighted to share the classroom space this semester with my colleague Anne-Marie Lubenow from the Brunner Foundation. This is our penultimate class for this semester. Anne-Marie will fill you in on details for tonight and for next week. I should just note that in the fall semester, we're in the process of preparing a class that will focus on matters of hate crimes, anti-Semitism, anti-Asian hate crimes, relationships between leadership groups as among African Americans and Jews in America. I think it will be a very interesting semester. So we invite you to submit your thoughts on that before we begin so that we can incorporate as many of them as possible. And with that, I will turn the screen over to my colleague, Anne-Marie Lubenow.
Thank you, Ted. And as Ted mentioned, my name's Anne-Marie Lubenow, and I'm the director of the Rudy Brunner Award for Urban Excellence at the Brunner Foundation. The Rudy Brunner Award is a national urban design award that recognizes transformative places that contribute to the economic, environmental, and social vitality of American cities. And we too have just been delighted to partner with TED and Northeastern University this semester to offer the Inspiring Design series and to have the opportunity to highlight some of the stories of our 88 Rudy Brunner Award medalists. And I also like to add that curating the series has been a really wonderful opportunity to engage many of the terrific people in our Rudy Brunner Award network, as well as to meet new ones. As with our other recent sessions, we're partnering with the Boston Society of Architects and Boston Society of Landscape Architects to offer continuing education credits. So if you're interested, please use the appropriate link that Kylie will put in the chat box to submit your information. As Ted mentioned, over the past 12 weeks, we've been exploring the role of design in shaping beautiful, just, and resilient places in America. And we kicked off the series in January on Inauguration Day with a conversation with Boston's first Chief of Equity, Carolyn Crockett, who discussed her efforts to integrate equity into city planning and development. Since then, we've continued to explore the issues. We've visited with people engaged in different types of urban development, housing, food, education, parks and public spaces, to name a few, in over a dozen cities across America. And throughout the process, we've considered not only the role of design, but also the influence of leadership and vision, community engagement, collaborative partnerships, and history. So now, as we begin to wrap up the series, we thought it would be interesting to pull back and re-examine the issue of equity at the city scale. We're going back to Chicago, which we visited back in January, when we learned about Inspiration Kitchens. And it seems that city seems to have an interest in design baked into its DNA. Chicago's known as the Windy City, not so much for its weather, although it is windy there, but what I would characterize as its ambition to be bigger and better than other cities. It's also home to 4 Rudy Brunner Award winners, including Millennium Park, Gary Comer Youth Center and College Prep, Inspiration Kitchens, which we learned about in January, and the Chicago River Walk. I encourage you to check out their stories on our website. And like so many cities, Chicago has focused investments in recent decades on downtown, and like many other places across America, is now reckoning with the legacy of racism and segregation and growing economic disparity. Current Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot's vision is to unite the city with equity and inclusion as guiding principles. And with us tonight are 3 people who are deeply interested in this intersection of planning, policy, and equity in cities. Joining us from Chicago are Maurice Cox. He was appointed Commissioner of the Department of Planning and Development for the City of Chicago by Mayor Lori Lightfoot in 2019. As an architect, Maurice has been celebrated for his experience merging architecture, design, and politics through multiple public, private, and elected positions. These include Director of Planning and Development for the City of Detroit, Director of Design for the National Endowment of the Arts, and as Mayor of Charlottesville, Virginia. He's also held roles in academic settings, including Syracuse University, University of Virginia, Tulane University, where he led the then City Center that we heard from as the Albert and Tina Small Center for Collaborative Design, New Orleans, and at the Harvard Graduate School of Design, where he was a 2005 Loeb Fellow. Tonika Lewis Johnson is also joining us from Chicago, and she's a photographer, visual interest, and lifelong resident of Chicago's Southside neighborhood of Englewood. Her folded map project visually investigates disparities among Chicago residents while bringing them together for conversation. Tonika has transformed the project into an advocacy and policy influencing tool that fosters dialogue about the impact of racial and institutional conditions. She was named one of the Field Foundation's leaders for New Chicago and was recently appointed as a member of the Cultural Advisory Council of the Department of Cultural Affairs and Special Events by Chicago City Council. And joining us from Boston is Garrett-Nelson, who is the Curator of Maps and Director of Geographic Scholarship at the Norman B. Leventhal Map Center at the Boston Public Library. He is a historical geographer who works on the history of planning and urban transformation in Boston, New England. This includes digital humanities projects that aim to bring cartography and visualization to bear on spatial politics. So as you may begin to infer, there are a lot of overlaps here, and I think this will be a really interesting discussion tonight. As in our other sessions, we'll start with presentations by our three panelists and then pivot to audience Q&A. Please use the Q&A box to submit your questions, and we look forward to a really interesting conversation. And now I'm going to turn this over to Maurice.
So thank you, Anne-Marie. And it's wonderful to be here to talk about beauty, equity, and justice in American cities, and what's happening on the ground here in Chicago. I have a short presentation on Mayor Lightfoot's signature initiative for the South Side and the West Side of Chicago called Invest Southwest. But to kick off the conversation about equity is a short 3-minute video that chronicles an effort in the kind of more tactical urbanism space as we attempted to open up the city and to allow outdoor dining to happen again, and what happened when we began to look at that from the neighborhood perspective as opposed to a downtown perspective. So let me quickly try to pull that up. I'll share my screen. Oops, 1 second. Oh, this is always such an awkward moment. Do you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so I'll do full screen. Do you still see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, good.
And we see full screen now.
Oh.
We aren't hearing your music or the soundtrack.
We are going to cut the ribbon on the corner of 75th and Indiana.
This idea was born maybe 12 weeks ago. 12 weeks ago. I was invited into one of those Zoom calls, and there was an architect who had a band of other architects, and they said, we want to make a difference in the South Side of Chicago as it reopens, that the small businesses and the restaurants that are here, that are trying to open safely, had a place to do it. And he said, this team right here can make that happen. And really, that's how this began.
So we're with a group called All Reimagining Chicago. We've been partnering with the Department of Planning and the city, basically trying to figure out which are the business corridors in most need throughout the city. The basic idea of everything that we're doing right now is trying to bring outdoor dining opportunities to restaurants that are struggling. What you see here is one of our first prototypes of a dining shelter.
They said they wanted to do something to really give back. They came up with a concept and it happened really quickly. We met on one Friday and then following Friday, Ernie came back and he said, here's what we would like to do.
The cabinet was inspired by a project I had seen in Montreal a few years ago where they did a boardwalk and they had all kinds of activities. So I was like, hey, we should do this on 75th Street. I came out here and talked to the businesses. That first day, right? Everybody was arguing about it. Everybody was like, should we close the streets? Should we do this? Should we do that? And I showed them these pictures and they were like, let's do it. And I was like, all right, let's go. And I said, what color would you like? Took a look at my bag and they were like, that's the color.
And so I went to the mayor's office and I said, we've got these architects. They want to do something extraordinary and they want to do it fast. So the mayor's office really sprung into action and said, okay, here's how we can get this funded. And lo and behold, they had a budget. And here we are 12 weeks later, celebrating the opening of a boardwalk on the south side of Chicago.
We're really excited about what this is going to do for this particular community.
I'm very excited about the boardwalk. Projects like this are so important because it gives everybody an opportunity to come together around something positive. This gives people in this community an opportunity to move up and down 75th Street. We're going to do pop-up shops. There's going to be gaming areas for kids. And I hope folks really come out and enjoy it.
So our hope is that this will be a model for other corridors because it's a quick way to get people energized, to show them that change is possible. So that was a just quick.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for the Neighborhood Opportunity Fund information session. I can see that we have people that are still coming in, so we are going.
Okay. That was funny. Apologies, I'm now trying to share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so let me do full screen. I wanted to kick it off with the video because it spoke to something very, very simple. As restaurants were trying to open up again, the question about how do you do social distancing, how do you serve outdoors if you're on a typical neighborhood main street, which may have 5 foot, 6 foot wide sidewalks. And we were so conscious that there were built-in inequities with the reopening that we decided to focus on the neighborhood main streets and assist them with widening those sidewalks through these tactical strategies. And, you know, it speaks to an inherent dichotomy that we have. And I think Marianne alluded to this. Anne-Marie alluded to this. We have spent so much of our efforts collectively in trying to work on the hearts of our cities, our downtowns, our riverfronts, the riverfront promenade, Millennium Park, that often not the same level of intensity and innovation has been brought to the places where people actually live. which I call the soul of a city, and that's its neighborhoods. So as we began to think about how do we bring equitable development to neighborhoods, inherently we focused on the main streets of those neighborhoods, the front doors of those neighborhoods as a place to start. And just to put it in a larger context, Chicago, the third largest city in America, has been experiencing a record population decline, where you can see the city has lost about 300,000 residents over a span of a couple of decades, where cities like New York and Los Angeles are growing. Well, if you look behind this population trend, you will find that the folks who are leaving Chicago are Black and Brown residents who largely live on the South and West Side. And it is not by mistake. In fact, it is by public policy. These two maps show the change in demographics and in wealth over the span of 50 years. In 1970, you can see that largely the high-income neighborhoods were aligned along the lakefront, and that there was a substantial middle-class population. And you fast forward 50 years to 2017, and you can see that the North Side, which is largely white and affluent, has grown, and the low-income portions of the city have expanded significantly on the West and the South Side. And basically the middle class has been pushed out. And this map is a result of 50 years of intentional public policy. And Mayor Lightfoot came in with an eye to change this map by specifically talking about strategic, catalytic investment in the South Side and the West Side, and to really look carefully at how public dollars were being spent on the South and West Side, and to try to change that equation where public investment was used to leverage private investment. And that is the initiative Invest Southwest. And what Invest Southwest is, through a whole series of analytics, we identified 10 community areas on the South and West Side, which had a set of assets that we felt we could build from to bring about this equitable development framework, and to do so in a manner that created an inclusive growth in areas that had seen historic loss in population. And in these 10 community areas, we decided to focus first on the front doors of those communities, the main streets of those communities, and to try to anchor private investment through coordinated public investment around areas that had great access to transit, had a great number of business licenses, and what was lacking was private strategic investment. And so early in the administration, the mayor asked about a dozen different departments to look at their budgets and to find investment that would be catalytic and could be coordinated across agencies and departments. And it totaled to $750 million of investment. 250 million of that is managed by the Planning and Development Department that I lead. And so Invest Southwest is meant to bring this 750 million with a goal of getting it to $1 billion that would leverage that multiple times in terms of private investment. So there are two parts of it. It's the catalytic investments, which constitute about $250 million of financial incentives we have to create that over 3 years. And at the other end, of the small business end, about $30 million to support about 60 new businesses that would co-locate on these commercial corridors. So you're working at both ends of the spectrum. And what I want to share with you is some of the first types of results that we're having in a yield of a set of requests for developer proposals in these 10 areas. We have had to build out the infrastructure to be able to deliver equitable development and inclusive growth. And we've done so by working, one, with the private sector. How do we create a pipeline of commercial real estate developers of color? And the city creates the opportunity, city-owned sites on these corridors, and our ability to convene the community and create a framework for engagement, which is Invest Southwest. And then lastly, the philanthropic community that has the capacity to level the playing field and bring resources to under-resourced areas. So the Chicago Emerging Minority Developer Network has been formed that is creating a pipeline of Black and Brown developers. The philanthropic, the Chicago Community Trust has created a pre-development fund that allows developers who might not otherwise be able to have the pre-development dollars to compete for these commissions to receive up to $100,000 for their pre-development costs. And then the Invest Southwest is these coordinated, curated opportunities for developers to seek these mixed-use, community-oriented development opportunities on the commercial corridors. And because we know that the criteria is going to dictate the outcome, could we run RFPs that would, shall we say, increase the likelihood that the development teams will be diverse and inclusive? And so you see language like this that's embedded in the RFP response that says the teams that are formed have to showcase equitable control, ownership, or decision-making authority by Black and Latinx partners. Or the expectation of the bidding teams is that their partnerships reflect the demographics of the community areas that they aspire to develop in. And so what happened? Well, lo and behold, we found an extraordinarily diverse development teams were formed. So 8 of the 12 proposals were led by minority developers, and you just see a cross-section of that diversity. The other thing that was embedded in the RFP was we believe that design matters, and that the work that is commissioned, private development that's commissioned in these communities has to reflect the value that these communities hold for us. And so we laid out a set of design criteria and design expectations from the very beginning. And then we had to deal with this fact of the diversity of the design team. And often you hear developers say, well, we can't find the diverse talent. Well, we put out a pre-qualified list. It was of Chicago-based design teams that could compete. Hundreds submitted their credentials. We chose 32 firms The majority of them are women-owned firms, joint ventures between majority firms and minority firms that formed partnerships to submit for these projects. And the majority of the teams that developers sought to do the work came from this pre-qualified list. But then the most important thing was how do you allow the community that is to receive these projects to shape the vision? So we worked over months to come up with development manuals that were driven by a set of community workshops that told us where we should go, what assets should be valued, what types of local wealth building they wanted to see, and we wrote it into the RFP. So we went from holding community meetings that literally had 400 and 500 people attending pre-COVID to pivoting to our COVID format, which were virtual roundtable meetings that we were hosting monthly, so that we could allow the community to grow along with us as the development visions came forward. And this was a fascinating aspect. When we started this process, we took the time to ask the community, well, what buildings in your neighborhood hold some special meaning to you? And inevitably, they took us to these iconic buildings on these main streets that were shuttered for decades as the place where they thought we could start this revitalization effort. And you're seeing 3 of the buildings that were a part of the RFP process. And the other part is we tried to zoom out and help people understand that we could create a micro-district where the opportunities to reinvigorate that corridor were multiple sites. And so we found 10 sites on this part of Chicago Avenue that constituted over 5 acres of redevelopment opportunity and 324,000 square feet of development potential. And so it was very important to kind of show people that we can be incremental, but intentional about all of the opportunities along that corridor. And to go a step further and begin to share with residents the multiple ways that a site might be configured. So this is all work that was done prior to releasing the requests for developer proposals. And most importantly, it was rooted in the data and the buying power of that community. So in this particular example in Austin, we discovered $159 million of retail leakage, and we were able to quantify what services that community could clearly support, and that was written into the RFP. And here is another step that we created specifically to keep people engaged during COVID. We had a Meet the Developer night, where 2 nights actually for Austin, because there were 7 different development proposals for the Laramie Bank site. And each developer produced an 8-minute video. And we had over 200 people participate in Meet This Developer night, and they were able to ask questions and answer questions about their particular interpretation of that community's vision. And here is just a sample of the types of responses we got. So the one in the upper right-hand corner was the vision that we worked on together with the community, and it was done pro bono by Perkins & Will, a Chicago-based firm. And fascinatingly, the visions that developers responded to tracked very, very closely to the vision that the community had established. And so all of that advanced work to try to get the local ownership public space, a range of affordable housing, locally rooted retail became, were manifest in the resulting responses. The other thing that was fascinating is out of the 12 proposals for 3 different communities, 9 of them were joint ventures, and it constituted about 275,000 square feet of potential development. And so what you're seeing here are the examples of the quality of the proposals that we received across 3 community areas. And then we continue to the next 4 sites, which you're seeing here. So these were the visions that we worked on together with the community to allow that to inform the outcome. And we've just received the results of these 4 different mixed use projects, of which there were 14 responses, 14 development responses to try to interpret these community visions that you see here. And we are continuing. We will release the next 4 RFP opportunities for the last 4, and we have committed to every 3 months, as long as there is a Lightfoot administration, to release these opportunities to rebuild these commercial corridors through this competitive process. And you can see here, our intention is not only to commission the work, but to see them through to construction as we go forward. And so those are meant to be catalytic opportunities for equitable development on these corridors. There is also the other end, the Neighborhood Opportunity Fund, that targets small-scale investments in existing mercantile buildings on these corridors. And so we are giving grants up to $250,000 to locally owned, locally located entrepreneurs who want to provide a community-oriented amenity on these same corridors. So while we do the big catalytic, we're also filling every storefront that we can. And as I said, we've already awarded 60 of these, and we will be awarding 60 more this year. So so both the small scale and the large scale. The other piece that we have identified that's critical to this strategy is the missing middle development deal. Those deals that are between 1 million and 10 million. And so this year, we are initiating the next round that is specifically meant to target some of these extraordinary, smaller, multifamily, mixed-use existing buildings with assistance to rehab them and to preserve the affordable housing which they naturally provide on these corridors. And so that is Invest Southwest, year 1. And then in year 2, there will be an Invest Southwest Dwell. There'll be an Invest Southwest Streetscape until we build these main streets to become the kind of anchors that they historically were for communities on the South and West Side. So with that, I will stop sharing and thank you for your attention.
Thank you. We'll turn it over to Tonika.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Cox, for that amazing overview of Invest Southwest and the city's efforts to invest in historically disinvested neighborhoods. And with that, I'm going to use my artistic practice and my home neighborhood of Inglewood, which is one of the neighborhoods that are priority in Invest Southwest, to kind of give you an example of the community engagements that I am a part of, as well as an engagement that was funded by Invest Southwest. So if we can share my presentation. I will start off with this slide. This is a slide of the homepage of Resident Association of Greater Englewood. And my artistic practice, I am an artist, a photographer. My latest title I've given myself is social justice artist. That is based in Chicago's Greater Englewood neighborhood. And my practice pretty much focuses, is grounded in engagement and engaging neighborhoods and communities and connecting residents to each other's neighborhoods. But that's rooted in my experience as a lifelong resident in Greater Englewood and as one of the co-founders of Resident Association of Greater Englewood, which was established in 2010. You can advance. Resident Association of Greater Englewood started off as a small resident group of residents that were just concerned about our neighborhood. We were building off of the tradition of organizing in Greater Englewood, and Greater Englewood is also fragmented by aldermanic wards. We're the only neighborhood that technically has 6 aldermen, and that created an information gap with amongst residents in Greater Englewood. If we all wanted to come together to advocate for change in a specific part of our neighborhood, there's ultimately 5 aldermen that we would have to kind of mobilize to communicate that effort to. And so because of that information gap, Aisha Butler had the bright idea to create RAGE, which was to serve as a way for residents who are concerned to learn about opportunities for Englewood residents, city resources, and just other programming that's going on. Because Greater Englewood, which includes Englewood and West Englewood, is a large community. A lot of people don't understand that those 2 neighborhoods together is over 6 square miles. So, you know, there's plenty of gaps to not be able to have information shared with everyone. And so RAGE served as a meeting place for residents. And one of the ways in which we do that is through the Englewood Village meeting that we host every other month. Now we do it virtually. And it was through this organization that I started to learn about my neighborhood as an adult, because experiencing a neighborhood as a child and a teenager is very different than returning to it as an adult, as a homeowner. And so this organization allowed me to meet other invested homeowners, other invested renters of the neighborhood. And we came together to do a lot of initiatives, but one I'm going to share with you that focuses on the use of arts in the built environment is our Englewood Rising Billboard campaign. You can advance. This campaign was dreamt up by members of RAGE and other community members who are affiliated with other organizations in Greater Englewood, such as Teamwork Englewood, IEI, Imagine Englewood If, and we came together to raise $12,000 to purchase the use of 5 billboards in Greater Englewood in 2016. And this was largely our community's pushback to the horrible way in which Chicago was being spoken about during the presidential election year. We were frustrated. Chicago's violence was becoming center stage internationally, and we understood that ultimately it was kind of talking about Greater Englewood, since we have become the poster child of everything that could be wrong with the neighborhood. And so we wanted to push back in the exact space in which we felt we were being bullied in, which was the media. And so our effort was using those billboards to share images of the community, as well as phrases of upliftment and hope. And we switched those billboards every month. And my photography was the centerpiece of that campaign, because I am a photographer. And aside from me being an engaged resident, I pretty much just photographed everything. And I used my art pretty much to document the neighborhood. And I wasn't really doing anything with my photography of the neighborhood. I hadn't pursued any exhibitions, but it was the billboard campaign that my neighbors and community residents were like, you should we should use your photography. You have the photography that we want people to see of our neighborhood. And so because of the campaign gaining so much recognition and media coverage, we were able to really kind of showcase the pride of our community and show a different perspective of the neighborhood through this billboard campaign. And it was the billboard campaign that got me excited about other artistic ideas that I had that I wanted to pursue that focused on amplifying the issues that my neighborhood was struggling with. As you can see, it was reported on by CBS and several other local media outlets. And then after I saw the impact that these billboards had to the community and to Chicago, it excited me to want to dream bigger artistically. Not only was I proud to be a Inglewood artist who had their photography featured on billboards, but also I photographed the residents. So I also was able to tell those residents, you're going to be on a billboard. So every month, you can imagine, I was contacting residents saying, you're going to be on a billboard. So that created a little viral atmosphere on Facebook with the billboards. And so that's when I saw the impact of art in the built environment and how it can mobilize people and help elevate not only hope, but conversations. And so that's what brought me to an idea that I had been thinking about since high school that centered on the next slide, which is a map of Chicago segregation. As you heard about Mr. Cox talking about the historic disinvestment, the disparity in wealth gap, education, so forth, and income, because of Chicago's historic segregation. This map is a reflection of all of those things. This is what Chicago looks like. The pink purplish that you see, that's Chicago's north side. It's predominantly white. Chicago's south side, the blue that you see is predominantly Black, and Greater Inglewood is on Chicago's south side. And so it was my vision, my artistic vision, that had me recall my experience from high school to think about, if you were to fold Chicago's map at its 0 point, which is downtown, since we are on a reticular grid, since you can't do it physically, but if you could do it conceptually, there are neighborhoods that would touch each other. And the neighborhoods that would touch my home neighborhood of Greater Inglewood are the north side, predominantly white neighborhoods of Edgewater, lower part of Rogers Park, and Andersonville. And also you have streets that run the extent of Chicago, north and south. So I knew that there were streets that existed in Greater Inglewood that were also in the neighborhoods that would touch Greater Inglewood if you were to fold Chicago's map. And so I created Folded Map. Next slide. And this was a way to personalize what the hard work of integration can look like on a personal level. Chicagoans disrupt segregation all of the time. And I don't feel as though our efforts are really amplified as much as the issue of segregation. So I wanted to create a project that would demonstrate all of that. And so to kind of give you a summary of what the project ultimately is without talking through it forever, I'm going to play recent coverage of Folded Map to give you an example of what it is. And it essentially is a visual investigation of Chicago's segregation using our unique grid map by pairing addresses together that are similar on the same street and bringing residents together to have a conversation. So you can go ahead and play the video.
Our series, A More Perfect Union, aims to show that what unites us as Americans is far greater than what divides us. And this morning, we're showing you a new approach to bridging divides in Chicago. Neighborhoods from the city's north and south sides are banding together to take on some very deeply rooted issues. The differences between these communities, they are stark. But as Adriana Diaz shows us, together they are tackling segregation and the inequity that comes with it.
Do you have any of those coasters live?
Yeah, I do.
Chicago residents Nanette Tucker and Wade Wilson share a love of gardening and craft beer.
That would be kind of cool.
It would be cool.
They're like neighbors, sort of.
Wade is called your map twin. Why are you guys twins? We're twins because when you follow the map, we touch one another on the map, north and south.
Like many cities, Chicago's a grid with many streets spanning north to south. If you fold a map of the city in half, you can match addresses on the north side with the same block on the south side.
You lived all your life never thinking you had a twin. And now
I have one.
Yes.
They live about 15 miles apart, but Wilson and his wife Jennifer live in the majority white north side neighborhood of Edgewater, while Tucker is in the mostly black south side neighborhood of Englewood.
How would you explain the differences between both of your neighborhoods, which are essentially equidistant from the center, but worlds apart in many ways?
It's very clear that neighborhoods primarily on the north side have had more investment. Everything from the street lighting to grocery stores and restaurants. It's plentiful on the north side and it's not here.
It's almost like you feel a light come on at a certain spot when you're going north. And when you're coming back south, you can feel the gloom that's upon us in Englewood.
Curiosity.
They met through Tonika Lewis Johnson, a social justice artist who grew up in Englewood, a community often in the news.
2 mass shootings
Shot in the head this
drive-by shooting claims the life of a 15-year-old boy in West Englewood.
Lewis Johnson created the Folded Map Project, which includes this film, to change the conversation. She contrasts how the same street, like Ashland Avenue,
They look very different.
looks on the north side
The sidewalks,
and the south side.
the maintenance of the building, none of which have anything to do with gun violence. Only disinvestment.
Chicago's segregation is due in part to racist policies like redlining, where banks would designate properties in minority areas, delineated in red, as too risky for mortgage lending, excluding Black Americans from a primary pathway of building wealth, homeownership.
You have neighborhoods that are predominantly Black that have low home ownership as a result of the discriminatory practices. Businesses left, so you don't have a business corridor, so therefore you don't have jobs. And now the schools are starting to fail because they aren't properly funded.
Her solution, bring the North and the South together with map twins.
It can feel so overwhelming to try to take on systemic racism, but you have found a way to almost chip away at it one person at a time, one pair at a time.
Yes. Let's use segregation as the actual thing that can connect us.
In her project, she doesn't shy away from uncomfortable truths.
How much was your home?
It was $61,000.
And how much was your home?
$535,000.
You asked Wade and Nanette what they each paid for their house. You know, it felt a little awkward.
I think the awkwardness helps people understand how we're all participating in this system that was created before us. And it doesn't truly reflect how we want to connect with each other today.
Frankly, we're privileged, and it's hard to sit next to a friend who hasn't enjoyed that privilege. We realize that there's an opportunity to actually do something.
Wilson and Tucker are doing something together. 3 years after they met through the Folded Map Project, with others they created Englewood Renaissance, which is helping beautify parts of Englewood and is now focusing on increasing homeownership here.
Creating a community together. The economics might be different, the neighborhoods might be different, but the core of who I am is pretty much the same as Wade and Jennifer. I want the same things they want.
For CBS This Morning, Adriana Diaz, Chicago.
This is such an important story.
Yes.
And with respect to time, we can go to the next slide. They're just giving a little recap.
Our series of more
So that
perfect
is
union
folded
names
math,
to show-
and I know you have to. And I have fancy slides, so you have to double click. You can go to the map twins. The map twins that I want to introduce you to a little bit more. If you click the slides, the pictures will pop up. Maurice, who lives in Greater Englewood, 5400 South Hermitage resident, and his map twins, John and Paula, 6400 North Hermitage residents. I just want to show you a small clip of their reflections on what it felt like to meet each other, and then go into explaining how I built expanded folded map to include a Photomap Action Kit. So you can go ahead and play the next slide.
There was like a genuine connection, right? It was like nothing forced or fake. We had a conversation, learned each other's differences in community. The things that I talked about or maybe spoke about that I would like to see here in Inglewood, they already had out there. When we spoke, to know that they couldn't even imagine being in the community, not having the things that, I guess, basic necessities. So yeah, it was interesting.
I guess it is really striking, you know, how lucky we are, and we certainly don't think of ourselves as living in a rich neighborhood, but compared to some, we are very privileged. Yeah.
And so the rest of this coverage is just explaining what I'm going to explain to you in the next slide. I wanted to have people who were not able to be a part of the original project as Map Twins, because I had a growing list of now 800 people since the project was exhibited in 2018 who were dying to be Map Twins. And so that encouraged me to create the Photomap Action Kit. And as Mr. Cox said, the real true soul of Chicago is in all of our 77 different neighborhoods. And since we're operating in a system of segregation that preceded all of us, I wanted individuals to have a self-guided way to experience each other's neighborhoods without having a biased misperception. So I created the Photomap Action Kit, which is a beautiful folder of activities, explanations about the project, but activities that I'm inviting people to run in their Map Twin neighborhood. And the activities are things that we all do when we go to another state or lucky enough to go out the country. We want to be with the locals. And what you do when you're with the locals, you run errands. So the Action Kit invites people to run errands in their Map Twin neighborhood, errands that speak to each industry so people can understand how certain industries invest or disinvest in neighborhoods very differently. Errands like buy organic apple in your Map Twin neighborhood. And luckily, unfortunately, but luckily in Chicago, it's easy to identify a neighborhood that's racially and economically different than your own. So you can go buy an organic apple to see how that experience is different. You can go take out $20 at an ATM to see how that experience is different. Go visit a local library or post office, or go buy lotion. Even that experience is different. And so I walk people through the errands that they can run, as well as offer them an opportunity to share back. But in closing, if you would like to receive a Photomap Action Kit, you can go to the website, photomapproject.com, but we can advance to slide 13. So I can just speak briefly about the Inglewood Arts Collective. The Inglewood Arts Collective, I decided to create in 2017, building up off of the Billboard campaign. It was at the same time that I was working on Folded Map. I wanted to help reframe the narrative of Greater Inglewood so that people can know there are artists in Greater Inglewood and in other neighborhoods that are historically disinvested in. We have our own artists. We have ideas that we would like to share. So I created the Inglewood Arts Collective, myself and 12 other amazingly talented artists, friends of mine. We're all from Greater Inglewood. We're all established. We decided to come together to create this collective so that we could just exist so people can know that there's other lived experiences in this neighborhood that people seem to think is only just full of criminals and victims. So you can go to the next slide. This is the list of all of us. We have textile artists, graphic designers, muralists, photographers, DJs. So during the pandemic, we came together to beautify this vacant store that had been vacant for years. It was ultimately an eyesore, so that people can understand how artists within a community can revitalize it using tactical urbanism, using artistry. So I'm gonna just play a 1-minute video so you can see how we beautified this vacant eyesore. And then just a couple more slides. The next slide was another activation by the Inglewood Arts Collective during the pandemic. It was for Juneteenth, building off of the billboard campaign. We purchased the billboard that's right off of the Dan Ryan on 63rd Street, right off of the expressway, entering into Greater Inglewood. And we had a small little pop-up where we passed out art kits. That's my timer. Where we passed out art kits to people who pulled up, and we passed out PPE, masks, sanitizers, but it was all for people to acknowledge the billboard that had just went up. And you can play this 30-minute clip, and then I'll close talking about Inglewood Arts Collective being a winner of an Invest Southwest commission to beautify a viaduct in Greater Inglewood. And the next slide, this was the landing page, the website for the Invest Southwest initiative that Inglewood Arts Collective, we were invited to apply to beautify the viaduct corridor in Greater Inglewood on 58th and Halsted because of the activations we had done during the pandemic. And we were the recipients of this amazing commission through Invest Southwest. And so we created a website so that residents could say the words that they wanted to see on the mural. And I am just going to, we can advance to slide 19 and close with our kind of video of what that event and the mural ended up looking like, thanks to the Invest Southwest initiative, where we were able to provide programming and also do the mural. And you could play slide 19, I'm sorry, and I'll close with that.
So excited to be here in partnership with Inglewood Arts Collective, Rage, and so many other
This is the corridor that we beautified, and
in the 16th floor, in the heart of the 16th floor.
And we also took over the vacant lot.
All right. Homebred Inglewood girl came out to provide all of these beautiful books for the babies.
Thank you. The end.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tonika. Let's shift to Boston, and we already have some very interesting questions coming in that I hope Garrett will help us to address. But for those of you who don't know, and I'm assuming that Garrett will elaborate on this, we have in Boston at the main branch of the Boston Public Library, one of the most spectacular map collections of any city in the country. And so Garrett, who is the curator there, will talk about some of the efforts that they've been making to address issues of the social and racial equity and to engage young people in thinking about a sense of place. So Garrett, you're on.
Thanks, Ted. And I'll be brief. I know that I'm sure the audience is eager to engage with Maurice and Tonika and their amazing projects in Chicago. I want to try to weave a little bit of a geographic and map thread through both of the amazing stories that we've heard already, and then say a bit about Boston and the work that we do at the Leventhal Map Center. You know, I think we've seen in both the work that Maurice is doing with the city of Chicago and with Tonika's work through activists and art organizations, some really powerful ways of engaging with how communities understand their own geographic past, how they tell stories about where they're going, and how communities interact with one another across space. And those are all stories which I think everybody should be able to see when they look at a map. We're very familiar with maps of our own cities, of our neighborhoods, and we tend to treat them as kind of mundane, prosaic things that, you know, tell us how to get to the grocery store, tell us how to walk to work. But the map encodes all sorts of patterns about how people live, how they've been connected to one another, and also how they've been kept apart. The term structural racism has, for good reason, become a part of all of our vocabulary in the past several years. And one of the ways that that structural part works is, of course, through the unequal disposition of space and geography. As Tonika said, that the segregation of neighborhoods, the reason that neighborhoods look differently is not just chance or coincidence, it represents historic patterns of disinvestment, of choices about where money and power are located, where they pool up, and where they're extracted. And so, you know, I'm fascinated by the work that Maurice is doing with the power of the city to shape and direct investment, and using the municipal government to empower communities to tell stories about themselves, to create gathering places where members of a community are able to come together and think about what does it mean to be a community. That term is rather mystical in some ways. You know, we use the term community quite often, but how in fact is a community formed? It needs a place to come together. It needs a sense of its own collective identity. And that sense is very often structured by the imagination of where one is on a map. And that, of course, brings me to Tonika's amazing project to bring neighborhoods across that spatial divide in Chicago. Of course, so kind of obviously patterned in a city like Chicago on the grid, and to think about how the map both keeps people apart, how it structures difference in communities, and also how it might potentially bring them together. And this mirroring effect in Chicago is really astonishing. And I think the way that we see these map twins talking with one another and thinking about what it means to live across these divides is really striking. That's, you know, these sorts of forces are as alive in places like Boston that may not have this neat kind of grid divide, but nevertheless still have experienced the same historical patterns of investment and disinvestment. And in fact, those are stories that take place not only through decisions about where cities invest or where developers build, but in fact about our very sense of what kinds of communities do we belong to, right? Why is it possible that a resident on the north side of Chicago, or one of Boston's affluent communities, can imagine themselves as occupying a totally different world, you know, to sort of retain this kind of ignorance about the larger community of which they're a part, right? And to see how they're tied in to people who may be spatially distant from them, even though that distance is sometimes only a few miles, but feel as though they're occupying a totally separate city, a totally different community. So, you know, as Ted mentioned in his introduction, at the Leventhal Map and Education Center, we have about 250,000 maps, atlases, globes, things like that, which are fascinating for a number of reasons. You know, they're beautiful historic objects. The Boston Public Library has been collecting these sorts of things for more than a century. But for us, one of the ways we like to think about those maps is not just as historical curiosities or, you know, kind of odd antiquarian artifacts, but rather as documents that help people tell these kinds of stories, to understand how communities have differentiated from one another and through what forces, who made those things kind of happen, to stop treating the divisions and differences in our built landscape as somehow natural, as just, you know, this place is like this and this place is like this, and somehow they've all, you know, just magically always been that way. But to think about how we conceive of ourselves as individuals, as citizens, as, you know, as participants in a democratic system that is both highly, highly differentiated by place, and the way that we occupy neighborhoods, communities, that map all sorts of other forms of difference, racial difference, economic difference, citizenship, immigration status, onto space, and the way that space preserves and holds on to those differences, but also imagines how they might come together and how we might think of ourselves as all belonging to a different kind of map. I'll say that in 2022, we'll be hosting an exhibition at the Central Library. All of our programs are free and open to the public. We'll be hosting an exhibition that looks into the question of environmental justice, how the environment and how space itself has served as a lever to worsen and preserve forms of racial, class, other forms of difference, and answers this question of why have people literally been marginalized, pushed to the edges of places, pushed to places where, you know, that are disinvested and that are environmentally hazardous, that are lacking in the sorts of attractive public places which we come to associate with well-off communities. Why have those two strands historically intertwined with one another? And how do we use a map to understand those patterns? How can we see those sorts of things playing out spatially? So I'll leave it there. I don't want to talk too long. I want to make sure that the audience has time to engage. But, you know, Maurice and Tonika, it's really amazing to hear these projects. And I hope listeners in Boston are encouraged to engage in the same way with some of the issues of our own city.
Thanks, well, I am working on a Find Your Fold guide to help other cities do folded map in their geography. So maybe we need to just connect.
And we can put the access point for the toolkit in the chat so that people can access that. There's an underlying question that has come up in a number of our sessions that I would ask all of you to address, and that is, when one makes, from a community level or from an official administrative level, an investment in a neighborhood that helps it to build its identity and to really get a clearer sense of itself and its assets within that community, is it possible to do that in a way that doesn't inevitably lead to gentrification and a driving out of the people who have been there? And have any of you encountered circumstances where there have been ways of bringing about positive change of that type without intrinsically destroying what it is you're trying to celebrate?
Well, I would love for Mr. Cox to answer that. I'm just going to add on to the question because in a lot of my presentations about folded map, that comes up. And because of my experience in Chicago, traversing across segregation, like so many Chicagoans, specifically Black Chicagoans have to do, you know, we constantly disrupt segregation, but the question that comes up in my presentations a lot is about gentrification. And, you know, I feel as though I have a unique perspective on it, but ultimately I do share it with, people in my social network, which is, the conversation seems to be blaming gentrifiers, and, I just want to pull back and look at it from a larger perspective, which is what I would love for Mr. Cox to speak to, is the ultimate fact is that investments, businesses, and resources follow a specific population. And it has been in Chicago, from my lived experience, young white professionals. And wherever they find interest or wherever they want to move because of where they can afford, they're not their presence, but what they represent as a market, as a dollar, ultimately entices businesses, and the neighborhood changes, and as a result, improves, taxes go up, all of those things. So my question that I've thought about is, how can our city prevent resources from consistently following a specific population, which tends to be young white professionals?
Well, I mean, this is obviously a really, really complex question, and the city, the Lightfoot administration is being incredibly intentional about this by demanding that the teams that lead development, reinvestment in these communities look like the communities they want to invest in, and that they have a majority ownership in those investments. And that we are not waiting for development to go where the market says there is buying power. We are going to uncover the buying power of these communities that they have written off. And so we collect that data and say, here are, $159 million annually of buying power that you're not serving. And so put that information out. So we are curating these communities, and guess what? The development teams are showing up, and they're showing up with the full diversity. And if we say, you have to show us how you are creating local wealth, and not just putting Black tenants in your building, but show us how you are building local wealth, and they are articulating it. And so I really think that that work is an important foundational work. I will tell you, it's challenging because gentrification, there are neighborhoods outside of the downtown core. Generally, they are adjacent to the downtown core that are gentrifying. But of those 10 Invest Southwest neighborhoods, 2 of them are genuinely seeing a change in the economic composition. The others, unfortunately, are still losing population, and they're losing population because the folks who are there don't have the amenities that they deserve. So we said, first, we have to start by bringing back those amenities that we all look for in our neighborhoods. And by the way, we want the owners, we want the entrepreneurs of those to be those who live in those geographies and who hire from those geographies. And that is actually how you do it. You are more inclined to stay in your neighborhood if the person who owns the coffee shop down the block is someone who you know and who you respect. And so you can build that into the economic equation, which is what we're trying to do. But it is so clear, looking at even the 2 presentations, what we're trying to do is not easy because we're trying to take Tonika's understanding, the kind of grassroots understanding of that community, and marry it with the resources that a municipal government has. And how do you do both and? And I think that's the beauty, and that's also the challenge of what we're trying to do.
Maurice, in 2 of the cities you've worked in, that is to say Detroit and Chicago, there are patterns of declining populations, particularly within the working and African-American communities. And a lot of the resources to assist those communities have come in from outside of the communities. What are the specific kinds of recommendations that you might have for both incentivizing the reinvestment by people within the community to people within the community, and how you draw out the talent within the community itself so that even though people may look the same, they in fact recognize that their investment has to go back into that community rather than having someone who looks the same but then takes their money outside the community again.
Sure. Well, again, I think that you know, when government comes, somehow you have to enter into alignment with the human and cultural resources of that community, and somehow embed, in my case, embed planners who are on the ground, who are meeting people, making relationships and making connections. How do we find, Tonika and that mural effort for the underpass? If we didn't have people embedded in that community who knew who the cultural assets, the resources were. So that's key. And, we've had to do this during a year of COVID. How do you continue to make connections? And we did it by having these roundtables where there might be, 20, 30 different community-based organizations who come together monthly at this forum to try to shepherd and guide this development so that it is of the community. It's challenging work. I really don't want to make it sound easy because it's not. But I think we are making strides because the people who are coming forward to invest in these communities are genuinely people who have already worked in that geography, and how they are increasing their capacity to deliver at the scale that this community needs them to deliver is by forming joint ventures with people who might have more capacity, but also joint ventures with those who are already on the ground. So you're bringing together a wonderful kind of coalition that historically has not always been able to work across divides. And I don't know if you had a thought on that, Tonika.
Yes, what I would also like to add is, not just, governments having contacts embedded in the community, that is key, but also going back to the core of relationships and also creating opportunities that amplify neighborhoods' existing talent, existing brain power, because Inglewood Arts Collective, the ideas that are now appearing as commissioned opportunities from the city, which are great. These are concepts and ideas that people in the community, specifically Inglewood Arts Collective, we've been dying to do for years, but we had to wait till connections were made and that the city created an opportunity with the financial support to implement these ideas. There's no lack of ideas or resources or solutions to people who exist already in communities. It's just having that bridge between community culture workers and government institutions is very key. I know that the Department of Cultural Affairs and Special Events would not have even known about, say, an Inglewood Arts Collective if it didn't start with that relationship between myself, other Inglewood residents, and individuals within the Department of Cultural Affairs and Special Events. That was not born out of a government RFQ or anything. It was literally those relationships. So I do just want to say that, I think the city of Chicago has demonstrated an interesting example of how those relationships, and knowing that there is genius embedded already in communities, if you just offer opportunities to support that through various initiatives, then you can work together to create solutions. But definitely, I feel that government institutions need to create pathways and opportunities to support existing talent within neighborhoods. Folded Map had to become an exhibition at Loyola University Museum of Art before it was introduced to the larger Chicago public. Whereas, if segregation wasn't an issue and all of the isms weren't an issue, it could literally have been done a different way. It could have been a connection with a government institution and used to amplify this idea that I had. But, an example, it had to be an exhibition first. And that is what exalted me enough to a point to be able to have relationships and build connections with people who work within our city council. So I definitely would say both, and what Mr. Cox is saying, as well as institutions needing to recognize the kind of built-in genius of individuals who exist in a community already.
Yeah. So we're closing in on the end of our time, and I would ask each of you to make a statement looking forward to a post-COVID era. How would you connect your understanding of a sense of place to the next steps in a strategy that goes about strengthening the communities we're trying to strengthen? Why don't we start with Maurice?
Well, I think there's so many levels on which we have to repair what has been done, the level of disinvestment. I showed kind of catalytic multi-million-dollar investments, but at the same time, there is this idea of how do you get business entrepreneurs into those storefronts of existing buildings, and the ability to do that, and then everything in between. So yeah, you have to form a really amazing joint venture to be able to compete for a $20 million commission. So is there that range of that $1 million to $10 million, which I believe is where a lot of the entrepreneurs reside right now. And so for the second year, we have literally surveyed dozens of buildings that we think we can put in the hands of entrepreneurs that can build wealth and own those. And so, I just feel with each effort of letting the community guide and lead and learn alongside builds the necessary environment of trust that's needed. There's a lot of trust rebuilding that has to be done, and you do it by actions. That 75th Street boardwalk, that expanded those sidewalks from 8 feet to 20 feet, that turned into an enormous amount of community goodwill as those business owners saw their receipts increase and they saw people coming out. That was a small effort. It cost $200,000. We need to do that as the stepping stone to these larger investments that require more time and more trust. And it's, I think it's each of these small steps that builds the kind of resiliency that's necessary to transform communities.
Garrett?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, Ted. I want to draw attention to the fact that the sense of place can be a very two-edged sword, right? A sense of place is a term that's often appealed to by affluent communities to keep out affordable housing or to resist change in their communities, right? you mentioned COVID and what things will look like after the pandemic. My greatest hope is that, having just been through one more world event that shows how deeply interconnected places are, never mind across a city, across the entire world, right? I would hope that that sense of place is maybe a little bit more extensible, right? That people on the north side of Chicago should not be able to exclude the south side of Chicago from their sense of place. Same in metropolitan Boston, right? So can we work towards a sense of place in communities that is not exclusive, that's not merely about what's a stone's throw from where we live and what we're familiar with, but instead, insists on a much more generous and geographically connected sense of place. I think it will take more than just COVID and just wishful thinking to make that happen. But I certainly hope that professionals who are appealing to that sense of place consider that, what are the limits and the extents of that sense of place.
Tonika?
I just hope that, government institutions and just people in general understand the importance of amplifying the role of arts within a community, not just as, a pretty mural, but it is an economic driver. It is an entertainment driver. It is a whole financial market, wherever there is cool art activity going on, it can be a tourist destination. And I would hope that, there is support of artists offered. I was just thinking about opportunities in Greater Inglewood, since this is just to use it as an example, it's a neighborhood that people were told to not come to. However, if you were to have a block where there's an art market, where people are allowed to, sell their art, do things like that, that not only provides an opportunity for artists and community to come together, but it is an economic driver. Artists are entrepreneurs, but we don't often have the physical brick and mortar space to do those things. And we don't have the support of the city to promote those kind of activities. So I would just say, continuing to recognize the importance of artists in communities, and not only helping communities establish and visualize their identity, but how that is an economic driver as well.
Anne-Marie?
Well, thank you, Maurice, Tonika, and Garrett tonight for a really rich conversation that was really fascinating in the way that it touched upon so many themes that have occurred throughout our series. And just to remind everybody, this session, like our other ones, has been recorded. It will be available on both the Myra Kraft website and the Rudy Bruner Award website. You still have some time to submit your AIA and ASLA information for credits. And next week is our final session, and we will be focusing on the lessons learned from all of these conversations. Ted and I will be joined by local architect and urbanist David Gamble, and former Speaker of the Massachusetts House of Representatives and Northeastern University Fellow for Public Life, Robert DeLeo. So we look forward to really beginning to pull together these threads of ideas that have emerged. So we hope to see everybody next week. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.